She stole my house for her daughter's wedding. No rent, no contract, no text. Just a clipboard, a fake smile, and the kind of audacity you usually need a permit for. I came home to find strangers drinking champagne on my porch like I was the one trespassing. So I smiled, called the city, and legally turned her big day into a construction zone. Because you can't spell entitlement without I ruin everything. And Karen, she brought glitter to a backhoe fight. I hadn't been home in 23 days of hauling medical supplies up hillsides in Montana, rationing freeze-dried meals, and sleeping in tents that smelled like damp socks and dignity. So when I pulled into my quiet little cul-de-sac in Lakewood Pines, I expected silence, maybe the chirp of sprinklers, the smell of someone grilling hot dogs. What I got instead was a string quartet rehearsing Pachelbel's Canon in D on my lawn. I blinked. There were folding chairs, white ones with satin bows, lined up across my vegetable garden like tiny judgmental soldiers. A floral arch blocked my front porch. My mailbox had been bedazzled. My driveway was roped off with a sign that read, "Reserved for bridal party." Lakewood Pines wasn't under any HOA. That was one of the reasons I bought there. No one to tell me my grass was half an inch too long or that my mailbox didn't match the neighborhood's aesthetic vision. It was an older neighborhood, quiet, tree-lined, the kind of place where cats sunbathe in the driveways and people wave just enough to be polite. I had built that garden with my own hands, raised those tomatoes from seed, and now, judging by the 30 or so strangers bustling around in coordinated beige polos, I had apparently come back to find it all turned into a wedding venue. I hadn't even made it to the front steps when a woman in stilettos handed me a clipboard and asked me to confirm the arrival time for the string lights. Then she blinked at my backpack and asked if I was part of the catering team. I was still wearing my trail boots, my shirt was stained with campfire ash, and my left shoulder was sunburned in the shape of a med kit strap. I told her this was my house. She gave a half laugh, the kind people use when you say something they think is a joke, but hope isn't. That's when she appeared, blonde bob, white linen pantsuit, clipboard like a weapon. She marched up, oozing managerial energy, and barked, "Those porta potties need to be moved behind the gazebo. I don't want them in the drone footage." She didn't even look at me. She just assumed I was another underpaid vendor lost on the wrong side of the tent, and wiped down the oak swing. It's dusty, and we have a champagne toast at golden hour. Then, finally glancing up, she froze for half a second before faking a smile that could curdle milk. "You must be the bartender," she said, squinting at my boots. "Nope," I replied. "I'm Alex. I live here." Her smile didn't drop. It cracked. "Oh," she said, voice dropping a note. "Well," it looked empty. "I was in Montana." "Right," she nodded, as if that explained nothing. "This house has such rustic charm," she added, gesturing to my porch like she was auditioning for a real estate commercial. "My daughter fell in love with it the moment she saw the Pinterest board." "Interest?" I asked. She waved the comment away like a mosquito. "Anyway, it's only for the weekend. The rehearsal dinner's tonight, ceremony's Saturday, and by Sunday you won't even know we were here." I asked her how she got inside. She said she had a key from her friend in real estate, who still had access from the old listing. I hadn't used that realtor in 4 years. She introduced herself as Karen, of course, not the mean Karen who complains to the manager, the real deal Joey grade Karen who sees boundaries as gentle suggestions and assumes all property is community property, if the community is her daughter's vision board. And somehow, in the span of 3 weeks, she'd hijacked my house, turned it into a fairy tale backdrop, and assigned me the role of background extra. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a full-blown wedding invasion. And I was standing in the middle of it with hiking dust on my boots, a forgotten mailbox, and absolutely no idea what came next. But one thing was very clear. I wasn't invited. I didn't move. Karen stood 5 feet away, still holding that cursed clipboard like it came with a law degree and a sense of entitlement pre-installed. She tilted her head slightly, the way people do when they're about to say something insulting but want it to sound like a compliment. "Look," she sighed, "I know this is probably confusing for you, but the truth is everything's already in motion. Vendors are booked, guests are flying in, and frankly, it's just a little late to renegotiate the space." She waved a hand in the general direction of my front yard, which had now been overtaken by floral arrangements so massive they could be seen from Google Earth. "If you could just be understanding for the next couple days, I'm sure we can all walk away from this happy." That's when I noticed the wedding invitation sitting on a small table next to a crate of sparkling rosé. Thick cardstock, metallic ink, cursive script like it had been ripped straight out of a Hallmark fantasy. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Kaylee and Todd at the Pine Estate. I blinked. The Pine what now? I picked up the invite and held it up. This is my house. Karen's eyes sparkled like I had just delivered a line in a rom-com. I know, it has such charm. That's why Kaylee chose it. Very Wuthering Heights meets Restoration Hardware. Karen, I said slowly, you renamed my property. She shrugged like it was just an alternate branding decision. We thought us at a more elevated. I walked inside, partly to catch my breath, partly to make sure my couch was still where I left it. Spoiler, it wasn't. The furniture had been shoved aside, my rugs rolled up like stage props, and in their place, rows of gold-plated chairs and a neon Better Together sign leaning against my bookcase. My cat Moose was trapped in the laundry room, yowling like he'd seen a ghost with a clipboard. I opened the fridge. Every shelf was jammed with catering platters, labeled Bride Do Not Touch. And somehow, there were now 3 espresso machines on my counter, each fancier than the last. I pulled open a drawer. All my utensils were gone, replaced with biodegradable forks and artisanal linen napkins stamped with Karen's initials. I stepped back outside and dialed the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation calmly, an unauthorized event, possible trespassing, and what I strongly suspected was an unlawful entry. 20 minutes later, a cruiser pulled up. Officer Martin stepped out. Early 40s buzz cut, the kind of guy who looks like he secretly talks to his lawn. I met him at the curb and walked him through the entire situation. Karen, of course, intercepted us halfway down the path. She turned the tears on like a faucet. Officer, thank God. He's back. We've been so scared. He showed up ranting, trying to evict us. He said he owns the property, but, he hasn't been here in weeks. I stared at her like she'd just claimed the moon was hers because she could see it from her driveway. Officer Martin looked between us like we were both auditioning for a very sad soap opera. Do you have proof of residency, sir? I nodded and handed over my ID, a utility bill, and a copy of the deed from my glove compartment. He scanned the documents, then looked at Karen. And you are? I'm the bride's mother, she said, wiping a tear. And I've been maintaining the property while it was abandoned. Do you have a lease? He asked. She smiled like that was a silly question. Oh, no, it was a handshake deal. I'm not sure which part made me angrier, the lie or the fact that she said it with the poise of someone describing a charity brunch. In the end, Officer Martin said it was a civil matter. No signs of forced entry, no immediate danger, and his exact words. It seems like y'all need to talk this through. Karen thanked him like he'd just saved her from a robbery. I stood there, jaw clenched, as the cruiser pulled away and a man in a tuxedo carried a harp through my front door. I realized something right then. I wasn't dealing with a mistake. I was dealing with a professional manipulator, someone who didn't just bend the rules. She redesigned them in her image. And if I wanted to win, I'd have to play smarter. Because Karen hadn't just taken over my house. She'd rewritten the script. And it was time I gave her a brand new ending. I knew I couldn't out-Karen her by yelling. Karen thrived in chaos. Her native habitat was conflict. She had already turned me into the squatter of my own home and convinced a police officer that her clipboard was more legally binding than a property deed. If I wanted to win this, I'd have to go full civil ninja. Calm, methodical, and utterly ruthless with receipts. So that night, while the rehearsal dinner blared in my backyard like a Pinterest rave, I drove to a 24-hour hardware store and bought 2 mini spy cams, a handful of adhesive mounts, and a digital audio recorder the size of a thumb drive. By sunrise, my home had surveillance, a camera in the garage, one tucked behind the bookshelf in the living room, and one peeking from the planter near the back patio. I synced them to my phone and tested angles with a coffee cup as my stand-in actor. I even set the recorder near the floral arch, disguised as a Bluetooth speaker. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. Karen had declared war using confetti and Prosecco. I was responding with evidence and legal firepower. The best part? She hadn't even noticed. Later that day, I started digging. Figuratively first. I Googled her full name, Karen Whitmore, and added wedding to the search bar. Jackpot. A string of neighborhood forums, old Facebook threads, and one hilariously scathing Yelp review painted a picture. Karen wasn't just your average overzealous mother of the bride. She was a serial venue hijacker. In the last 2 years, she had borrowed 2 other properties for events. One was a vineyard that mysteriously withdrew their complaint after an HOA negotiation. The other was a private ranch that had posted a sign reading, "Wedding ruined, ask Karen why." The posts were full of phrases like bullied into silence, claimed HOA backing, and my personal favorite, she said she was doing God's work, but with mimosas. Then I stumbled across something even better. Karen was, as it turned out, not just a member, but the president of the neighboring Willow Creek HOA. That explained her constant references to association approval and the fake aura of authority she carried like a Louis Vuitton clutch. I pulled the bylaws for Willow Creek. It clearly stated that HOA officers were prohibited from using association funds or influence for personal benefit. I screenshotted everything because now I wasn't just a victim, I was a whistleblower, and Karen had built her little empire on HOA letterheads and unearned confidence. Meanwhile, I remember something else. Before my trip to Montana, I had submitted a permit request for a structural survey on the front portion of my lot. I had planned to expand the driveway and install a small retaining wall. The city had approved it while I was gone. I checked the documents. Permit active, inspection flexible, scope, soil integrity testing, equipment allowed, light excavation, timing, my choice. Karen had her countdown to I do, I had mine to oh no you didn't. And best of all, every move I was about to make would be completely by the book. That night, as fairy lights twinkled over tables that used to be my herb garden, I sat inside with a legal pad and a black Sharpie. Step by step, I mapped it out. Gather evidence, secure permits, notify the city, execute with precision. No drama, no shouting, just one well-timed reality check. I was done being a confused homeowner. I was now the quiet storm Karen didn't see coming. What she thought was a backdrop for her Instagram perfect wedding was in fact a legally active construction zone, waiting to wake up. And in 3 days it would. But first, I needed one more thing. Someone from the inside. Someone who knew just how deep Karen's delusion ran. And fate? Well, fate was about to deliver. 3 days. That's how long I had before Karen's grand illusion met the blunt force of reality. From the outside, everything looked picture perfect. White canopies, glass chandeliers hanging from oak trees, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Kaylee and Todd's Forever begins here," nailed to the actual trunk of my 100-year-old maple like it was a bulletin board at a coffee shop. My grass was being butchered by a crew laying down a raised dance floor, complete with uplighting and waterproof speakers. The worst part? Someone had spray chalked the couple's initials in pastel pink across the flagstone pathway I built myself. It wasn't just an invasion anymore, it was a full-on occupation with branding. While Karen paraded around the property like she was hosting the Met Gala, I stayed busy. I had 50 custom warning flyers printed, black and yellow, with bold letters reading, "Soil vibration testing in progress, do not enter, construction zone." I delivered them door to door in the neighborhood, attaching a short note apologizing in advance for the disruption. I didn't mention the wedding. I didn't need to. Rumors were already flying faster than the drone Karen booked for her fireworks selfie flyover. One neighbor, an older woman named Delilah, looked at the flyer and said, "Oh, thank God. I thought I was losing my mind." I was about to call the city myself. Another just laughed and said, "Please tell me this is exactly what it looks like." I smiled but said nothing, let the speculation do the heavy lifting. That afternoon, I was in the driveway when a guy in cargo shorts and a tuxedo t-shirt approached. "Hey," he said, holding out a bottle of lemon water, "you look like you could use something non-alcoholic." I took it cautiously. "You with the wedding?" he smirked. "God, no, I'm just the younger brother of the poor bastard marrying into that mess. Name's Jared." We talked for a bit, and he started opening up like a guy who had been holding his breath too long. Apparently, he'd arrived 2 days early and immediately knew something was off. "I mean, it's beautiful," he said, gesturing toward the chaos, "but also insane. Your kitchen has been turned into a fondue station." I raised an eyebrow. "Did anyone ask if they could use it?" Jared laughed. "Karen doesn't ask, she announces." Then he dropped the real bomb. You know this isn't the first time she's done this, right? My cousin's graduation party. Took over a golf club in Arizona. They're still mad. I paused, then carefully asked if he'd be willing to talk on camera. Not like a news interview, just a quiet little conversation for documentation. Jared looked around, shrugged, and said, "Why not? She's going to scream at me anyway." We sat near the back porch, my phone recording audio from a potted basil plant between us. He recounted story after story. Fake venue deals, vendor scams, the time Karen faked a health scare to get a booking fee waived. The man had receipts and I had them recorded. Just when I thought the timing couldn't get better, Karen stormed into the scene mid-sentence. She hadn't noticed the phone. She was too busy ranting about a missing floral arch and how the welcome sign had the wrong font. "This is not whimsical enough," she shouted at a poor event planner who looked like he regretted every decision leading to this gig. Jared stood up to leave, but not before Karen caught sight of me. "You," she hissed. "I hope you're not planning to ruin my daughter's day." I smiled. "No, ma'am. I'm just planning to improve the soil integrity of my property, long-term stability and all that." She narrowed her eyes, but didn't respond. Instead, she turned back toward the garden and barked something about swapping out the napkin holders because the rose gold clashed with the sunset tone. As she walked away, Jared leaned in and whispered, "You're planning something, aren't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He grinned, took a sip of his lemon water, and said, "Good. She deserves it." With less than 48 hours to go, the wedding setup was nearly complete, but so was mine. Karen had the aisle, the lighting, the music cues. I had permits, proof, and patience. And if she thought a bulldozer was out of place at a wedding, well, she really should have read the fine print. The morning of the wedding arrived with a kind of artificial calm, too quiet, too controlled, like the moment before a magician's trick goes sideways. Sunlight filtered through gauze canopies, casting soft shadows over rows of chairs draped in blush pink satin. The yard looked like the cover of a bridal magazine if you ignored the backhoe idling at the end of the driveway. I sipped my coffee, watching the machine's operator, a guy named Vince, roll down the window and flash me a thumbs up. He had no idea he was about to become a legend. By 10:45 IE the demolition crew had parked 2 trucks, unspooled hazard tape across the grass, and hammered bright yellow warning signs into the ground, right next to the "Welcome to our Forever" board. One worker unfolded a large map of my property and started marking off testing zones with little red flags. I stood near the mailbox, entirely within my rights, and nodded approvingly. Karen's reaction arrived precisely 4 minutes later. She stepped out of her rental SUV in full mother-of-the-bride regalia, heels, pearls, and a silk shawl flapping like she was late to an opera. Her jaw dropped when she saw the excavator's scoop parked dead center in the wedding aisle. She marched up to me so fast her heels clicked like gunfire. "What is this? What the hell's going on here?" I raised my coffee. "Good morning. Just a little soil integrity testing, city approved, all very routine." She stared at me like I'd just drop-kicked her vision board. "You're ruining everything," she shrieked. "Do you know how much money we've spent?" I nodded thoughtfully. "And yet none of it on venue rental. Curious." She turned on the nearest worker. "Shut this down right now." He calmly handed her a laminated copy of the inspection order. She snatched it, read the heading, and physically recoiled. This is a setup." "No," I said. "This is soil setup, and very legal." Guests began to arrive just as the trenching started. The backhoe let out a loud grr, grr, grr as it broke ground exactly where Karen had envisioned, rose petals in a string quartet. Dust swirled, linens flapped, a toddler screamed. One older guest in a pale blue suit turned around and walked straight back to his car. The quartet attempted to play through the noise, but gave up when one of the violinists was nearly decapitated by a drifting centerpiece. A waiter tripped over a caution cone and dropped a tray of champagne flutes into a hedge. It was chaos, but coordinated, beautiful, lawful chaos. Then came the bride. Kaylee stepped out of a white rental van in full gown, hair curled like she was starring in a period drama. She stopped mid-step, staring at the orange cones, the yellow tape, the excavator, the man in a hard hat waving politely. Her face shifted from confusion to horror in under 10 seconds. I approached slowly and handed her a folder. Inside, copies of the permits, the HOA complaint forms, and just for flavor, a printed screenshot of her mother's fake lease agreement pulled from her wedding planning binder. She read in silence, her eyes narrowed. Then she turned, very slowly, and walked straight into the bridal tent. What followed was audible from 3 lawns away, shouting, crying. Something crashed, maybe the cake table, maybe someone's emotional stability. Karen's voice rose above the chaos like an off-key soprano. "It's still happening. We can fix this. Just keep going." But the guests had seen enough. Some left, some stayed to gawk. A few took selfies with the excavator. At 11:50 a.m., just 2 minutes before the scheduled ceremony, the backhoe dropped its scoop into the ground with a satisfying thud, kicking up a small cloud of dust that rolled over the aisle like poetic justice in particular form. I didn't gloat, I didn't cheer, I simply stood at the edge of the porch, arms crossed, and watched Karen's fantasy collapse in real time. The arch sagged, the chairs saggered, the DJ packed up his laptop and muttered something about bad vibes, and somewhere in the distance, I swear I heard a champagne cork pop, not from celebration, but because someone tripped and knocked over the cooler. At precisely noon, the ceremony was unofficially canceled by virtue of entropy. And the best part? I still hadn't raised my voice. But now that the first impact had landed, the real cracks were about to show. Because I wasn't the only one recording that day. The wedding that wasn't ended in shuffling feet, smudged mascara, and folding chairs abandoned like casualties of aesthetic warfare. Karen, to her credit, didn't crumble on the spot. No, she did something far more on brand. She regrouped, lawyered up, and by Tuesday morning, I received a letter via certified mail demanding $120,000, 0 cents in damages for intentional sabotage, emotional distress, and loss of event deposit. It came on letterhead so fancy it probably cost more than the rented champagne fountain. Her attorney even included a spreadsheet, color-coded naturally, itemizing things like bridal arch trauma and emotional scarring of guests. My favorite line item, disruption of drone-based fireworks display, $6,750, 0 cents. I framed that one. I wasn't surprised. Karen didn't believe in consequences. She believed in optics. If she couldn't win in reality, she'd try in paperwork. But I'd already retained counsel. My attorney, Gloria Patel, was a soft-spoken woman with a razor for a brain and 0 patience for weaponized narcissism. She looked over the documents and smiled like someone handed her a puzzle she already solved. "We'll respond," she said. "But first, let's bury her in facts." So I sent Gloria everything, my permits, the HOA code, the zoning approvals, even the time-stamped footage from the construction crew. Then Jared came through with the good stuff. He emailed me the full video he'd recorded the day before the wedding. In it, Karen could be heard, clear as a bell, saying, "The owner? He's not here. The place looked abandoned. Besides, I have a key from the old realtor. It's practically mine for the weekend." She also referred to the event as our little takeover and laughed. Gloria watched the video twice, then said, "Let her sue, I dare her." But we didn't stop there. Digging deeper, I found a folder in my office labeled HOA Correspondence, Willow Creek. Inside were past newsletters, bylaws, and a lovely little PDF written by none other than Karen herself, Code of Conduct and Ethical Use of HOA Resources. It had her signature at the bottom and her photo at the top. Section 4.3 of that very document stated, "No HOA funds or influence shall be used to benefit personal events, business endeavors, or familial celebrations." Jared's invoice showed the caterer had been paid using a Willow Creek HOA discretionary card. The florist, same. The drone vendor, you guessed it. Karen had funded a private wedding with public HOA money and documented it with the precision of someone who'd never been challenged in her life. We collected receipts, invoices, and statements. Gloria compiled it all into a clean, lethal response, a motion to dismiss her claims, and a formal complaint filed against Karen with her own HOA board. A week later, Karen's legal team went quiet. No follow-up letters, no lawsuit filings. Nothing but radio silence and a puff piece she tried to plant in the community newsletter titled, "Mother of the Bride Faces Unforeseen Construction Nightmare." But it was too late. Jared Blessum posted his video online, not out of spite, but under the heading, "This is what entitlement sounds like." It hit 100,000 views in 2 days. Local news picked it up, neighbors started whispering, and then came the best twist of all. The Willow Creek HOA held an emergency meeting. Their public statement was brief but brutal. Karen was suspended pending investigation for unauthorized allocation of funds and misuse of title. As her carefully curated world began to unravel, Karen tried to spin the story. She blamed a clerical error, said the charges were false, claimed I was running a smear campaign for internet clout. But the documents didn't lie. The receipts didn't lie. And the internet, it doesn't forget. Her empire of decor and denial was crumbling by the minute, and I hadn't even dropped the real hammer yet, because sometimes karma wears pearl, and sometimes it gets served with a side of lemon pie and public records. Karen's dissent wasn't dramatic, it was administrative. Within 10 days, the Willow Creek HOA board voted to remove her as president, citing gross misuse of authority and funds. The statement was dry, bureaucratic, and devastating. HOA credit cards were frozen. A full audit began. The caterer filed a complaint. The floral vendor threatened small claims court. Even the drone company chimed in, furious that their footage had ended up in a viral video titled "The Most Expensive Tantrum in Suburbia." It wasn't a scandal. It was a controlled demolition of Karen's social standing, and ironically, she hadn't seen it coming, despite organizing one herself. Her once daily social media posts turned eerily quiet. The group chat she moderated, Lakewood Ladies Who Lead, went inactive. Rumor had it she tried to start a new Facebook group called HOA Truth and Honor, but no one joined. Her HOA email bounced. Even the friendly neighborhood wine nights stopped sending her invites. And then there was Kaylee, her daughter, the bride, the human centerpiece of this entire pastel-colored nightmare. She unfollowed Karen on everything, blocked her phone number. One neighbor said she overheard Kaylee at the local cafe say, "She didn't just ruin my wedding, she hijacked my entire relationship." Apparently, Brett had packed his things and moved back to his brother's place. The honeymoon suite never got used. Then came the cherry on top, a small but sassy headline in the Greenville Echo, our town's local paper: "Bridezilla's mom destroys own HOA," complete with a blurry photo of Karen yelling at a construction crew in front of a cake table. The article recapped the timeline with ruthless efficiency and dry wit, even quoting one guest. It was like watching Downton Abbey get tackled by OSHA. The quote went viral. Memes followed. One had Karen's face photoshopped onto a bulldozer. Another dubbed her the queen of unpermitted affairs. My favorite, a wedding invitation edited to say, "Hosted by entitlement, catered by delusion." As for me, I didn't do much. That was the point. I didn't need revenge. I had documentation, and now I had requests. A popular podcast about property law and neighborhood drama, Boundaries and Barbecue, reached out for an interview. The host, a former real estate attorney with a cowboy drawl and a wicked sense of humor, invited me to share my side of the story. We recorded the episode at my kitchen table, the same one where Karen once tried to store shrimp cocktail without asking. I told him everything, from the clipboard to the cake collapse. He laughed so hard at the phrase "emotional damages from soil vibration" that we had to re-record the segment twice. The episode dropped on a Friday. By Sunday, it had cracked the top 50 in the society and culture category. My inbox filled with messages, some from neighbors thanking me for standing up, others from strangers with HOA horror stories of their own. A woman from Wisconsin said, "Your story gave me the guts to fight back against a guy who fined me for leaving my garage door open for 7 minutes." It was surreal. Somehow a woman trying to host a fairy tale wedding in a stolen backyard had sparked a quiet revolution in property rights awareness. Still, I kept things low-key. No merch, no media tour, just me, my cat Moose, and a new sign on my lawn that read, "Private property, no weddings, no exceptions." I installed a new mailbox, this one with a locking flap. I replanted the garden, ripped out the stained grass, and replaced it with native plants that didn't care about confetti. Peace had returned, mostly. And then one afternoon, as I walked to the curb, I found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a soft blue card with embossed lettering. It was an invitation. Not from Karen, not from her daughter, from someone entirely unexpected. And this time, it asked for permission. Not forgiveness, not assumption. Just a simple question: "May we The card was cream-colored with pale blue edges, handwritten in looping cursive that looked like it belonged in a time capsule. Inside was a simple note: "Dear Mr. Carter, we've lived 4 houses down for over 30 years. This summer we're celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary. We've always admired your garden from afar. If it's not too much trouble, would you allow us to host a small gathering in your backyard? Just family. No decorations, no DJ, no surprises, just love. May and Harold Whitaker." I stared at the card for a full minute, unsure if I was still living in a sitcom or if the universe was offering me a clean epilogue. I walked down to their house the next day. May opened the door in an apron covered in flour. Harold sat behind her in a recliner, watching a wildlife documentary with the sound too low to hear, but just loud enough to feel like company. They greeted me like a long-lost nephew. May had tears in her eyes when I said yes. "Not a big event," I told them. "Just a gentle, respectful one." She nodded. "We don't need big. We already had that 50 years ago. This time we just want true." The way Harold looked at her right then said more than any fireworks drone ever could. On the day of their celebration, the yard was calm. A single white trellis stood beneath the old maple. Yes, the same one Karen tried to turn into a branded monogram prop. Ribbons fluttered in the breeze. There were no place cards, no floral arches, no drones humming overhead, just folding chairs, a string of fairy lights, and a small table of lemonade and lemon bars. The guests trickled in, family members with smile lines and crinkled photo albums. No one shouted, no one posed. They hugged, they laughed, they clinked glasses over stories that weren't curated for Instagram but carved from memory. I stood quietly on the porch, Moose curled next to my ankle, purring like a distant bass note. May saw me and waved me over. "We saved you a seat," she said. I shook my head. "I'm just a groundskeeper today." She smiled. "Well, then you've kept this ground sacred." Harold winked and handed me a folded napkin with the words, "Thank you for your soil. It holds more than roots," written in pen. I sat anyway. As they renewed their vows, I looked around at the space that had once been hijacked, broken, turned into a carnival of entitlement, and now, transformed by respect, it was something else entirely. Not a venue, not a battleground, just a backyard. A place where things could grow again. After the short ceremony, May came up and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You turned a disaster into a sanctuary," she said. "That takes more than revenge. That takes heart." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and offered her the last lemon bar. Over the following weeks, things settled into a quiet rhythm. The HOA scandal faded from the local paper, replaced by town hall disputes and a particularly spirited debate about mailbox heights. Karen, she vanished from public view. Some said she moved to Florida. Others claimed she was trying to write a book about the ordeal. I didn't care either way. Her chapter here had ended. What remained was mine again, reclaimed not just the land, but the feeling of belonging to it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and washed the trees in that syrupy gold light that makes everything look forgiven, I hammered in a new wooden sign by the front gate. Not a warning, not a threat, just a boundary with grace. It read, "This property is not for rent, not for weddings, not for taking. It's mine. Always has been." And underneath, smaller but just as clear, "Welcome by invitation only." I stepped back, admired the view, and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months. No clapping, no applause, just wind through the trees and the faint clinking of dishes from a neighbor's dinner. It was over. And yet, a soft knock came at the door. Not urgent, but deliberate. Another envelope in hand, another request. Because when you set your boundaries clearly, the right people don't trespass. They knock. Some battles aren't won with noise, they're won with boundaries. This wasn't just a story about a ruined wedding. It was about reclaiming space, dignity, and the quiet power of saying no. Karen believed she could rewrite reality with charm, clipboard, and entitlement, but in the end, truth had permits, patience, and proof. That's what resonates with people, especially Americans who've seen one too many Karens turn community into chaos. And maybe, just maybe, this story reminds us that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it arrives in silence, with a backhoe and a lemon pie. If you've ever dealt with an entitled neighbor, a power-tripping HOA, or someone who thought asking was optional, share your story below. Like, subscribe, and tag someone who needs to see what happens when boundaries get bulldozed by the right person. because revenge is sweet, but revenge with receipts, that's unforgettable.